Christian parenting.
Hey, Lisa, welcome back to Pardon the Mess. How are you today?
So great. Courtney, I always love being with you.
Love you, friend. I love that you're down the road, but we couldn't sort it out today. But a hotel room will work. Talk to me about a hack. You always give me good life hacks. One time you taught me to put mascara on my hair. So anything like I was today years old when I learned this, or any new hobbies you got going on over there? Fill me in.
Okay, let's do hobbies first. I have discovered that I really love watercolor painting. I had picked it up several years ago and then put it away because I was trying to do acrylics. I did a little bit of watercolor, but mostly I was doing acrylics. Got overwhelmed with it, put it away, got super busy. And then I've just picked it up again. And there's a website, it's Emily Lay Studios or something like that, where you can get little books that she does. And she kind of teaches you how to do the watercolors. And I am loving it. So, yeah.
Love it. Love it. We did the books for the girls for Christmas. So we love those. And they're cute if you frame them. So I like the guide. I'm not just a like blank canvas kind of girl. I love having the guide next to it. So
I
cute.
love having the guide. There's many spiritual lessons in having the guide, okay?
All right. Any hacks or tricks going on in your world for us?
Yes. Let's see. One hack that I learned recently that I think is really amazing that I have survived this long without knowing it is if your car fob, if the battery dies, it's actually a very quick fix.
Really?
And I thought it was going to be super complicated and awful. And I put it off. And then just went to like a little auto parts store. They switched it out. It took 2 seconds. And why am I today years old just figuring this out?
Isn't it funny, those things? Like I carry around things for the post office for like 3 months in my car. And then I go and I'm like, well, that took 3 seconds. Like, why am I so procrastinating these things? That's good to know. I didn't know about the key fob.
Yeah, it requires like a battery. And they just open it up, replace the battery. The batteries are right there at the register. It was so easy.
Awesome. And this is not sponsored by AutoNation, but we love it. Okay, Lisa, you normally write a book a year, a book every couple years. But when I talked to you the other day, I said, how are you? You're like, good. I just finished writing 3 books. I'm like, 3 books. So the one we're going to talk about today is surviving an unwanted divorce. Will you tell us why you felt, I kind of can assume why it's a need, but why did this one bubble up on your radar this year?
Yeah, Courtney, I did not want to write this book. I am past the intensity of all of the immediate hardships and heartbreaks of the divorce. I spent a long time healing. I'm now remarried to an amazing man that loves me really well. So the thought of going back and revisiting some of the more intense realities of walking through the death of your marriage, I just wasn't real excited about doing that. But I hear from so many women that one of the most painful parts of the divorce for them is that they haven't known where to get good theology around divorce. There's Bible verses that people know, but having the correct interpretation of those Bible verses, knowing how to study it, it's just not something that's readily available. And also, I do Haven Place retreats where women come in on my property where I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I only take 50 women at a time, but I take them through some intensive healing along with my therapist, Jim Kress, and then also my resident theologian, Dr. Joel Muddamalle. And I know that not every woman is going to be able to attend one of our small intensives. And so the 3 of us really felt like there needs to be a book, not only for people who are walking through a divorce, but also for people helping people walk through a divorce, friends, family, church leaders, sisters that are watching someone they love walk through an unwanted divorce. And I really felt like we need an immediate resource that when someone goes through this, you can order it right now, have it tomorrow. And it is the thing that it's almost like in a book form, the emergency room for someone who has just had the shock of their life and they realize their marriage is not what they thought. They've tried and now there's this big implosion. And, I'm a big fan of marriage. But there's a big difference, like my good friend Leslie Vernick says, between a difficult marriage and a destructive marriage. And once someone is at the place, either because they've had to accept some harsh realities they can't change about their spouse, or their spouse has said, I'm done. So, whatever the reason for the unwanted divorce, there needs to be a resource to put in someone's hands immediately so they don't feel like they are left having all the oxygen in the room sucked out and they don't know where to find an air tank.
Yes, I'm so glad you made that distinction because you've written so many books to help so many women. But I thought for today's conversation, we are talking about you are definitely, or maybe not, mostly, you're pretty sure you're going through a divorce because there's a whole lot of talk about, do I go through a divorce? But I haven't seen a whole lot of resources on this is happening. I don't want it to happen, but what do I do now? And I just want to thank you for all the books you've written because one of my dear friends, I will not say her name, is walking through a divorce right now. And when I met her a few weeks in and saw her, she then sent me a picture of her coffee table and it had her Bible and a tissue box and every one of the books you have written. And she was sorting through and piecing together and reeling. And she did get to go to Haven Place and spend time with you. And as her friend, like I had nothing to offer. You just don't want to be like, well, I'll pray for you. It's like, no, she needed real help. And so she was lucky enough to spend 2 life-changing days with you. But I think she will probably already have this on her bedside table of just like, okay, this is happening. I didn't want it. Now what? And so talk to that girl who is facing the shame, the questions. Where do you even begin besides ordering the book? Where do we begin when you're hit with that reality?
Well, let me give you some theological help at first, because I think, especially if you're a Christian, one of the most popular statements that other Christians will speak about divorce, and it may be the only Bible verse they know about divorce, it comes from Malachi chapter 2, and it's God hates divorce.
Mm,
And so, you know, that can, to someone who's walking through the crisis of an unwanted divorce, that can feel like one of the most harsh, hard to accept Bible verses. And that's where a lot of Christian women's shame comes from.
mm,
And people have weaponized that verse and they've used it to try to convince someone, no matter what, you need to stay in your marriage.
mhm,
Well, if their spouse is doing destructive things, for example, having an affair with another woman and refusing to leave the other woman, or
mhm.
there's abuse, physical, emotional, financial, or there's abandonment, those are factors that sometimes put women in a very hard situation. And obviously it can be men too. I don't want to negate that it's always the woman that suffers and always the
Yeah,
woman
yeah,
that's facing the
yeah.
unwanted divorce, because sometimes it can be men as well. But for the sake of our conversation, that can leave a woman feeling like, what do you mean I shouldn't divorce that? And it can feel like, if I get a divorce, God hates divorce, so does God hate me? Or
Mm,
am I, not only am I having to face the death of a marriage, but does this mean I'm a failure in God's eyes?
mm,
And so I
yeah.
feel like it's really, really important to hear, for a woman who's facing this, to have tender truth spoken with a tender voice. And that's
Mm,
exactly what I offer in this book. So let's visit the Malachi 2 uh, verse, God hates divorce. So, in the original language, King James language translation of the Bible is not the original Bible. I think some people think because it's one of the earliest versions of the Bible that, that's where the Bible started. It's not. The Bible started all the way back. We can even go all the way back to the Septuagint. Okay. So we'll just say, for the sake of ease of our conversation, some of the earliest versions of the Bible, that verse, you have to really do some theological work. But the most important part is the object of the hatred. Is the object of the hatred the person who's getting a divorce? And is God saying that the hatred comes from him to a person who's getting a divorce? And that's not the way the language works. What that verse
mm,
actually, and I think it's the best translation, and even some modern day translations have switched it. So the best translation that I have seen is, when a man hates and divorces his wife, he does violence against the one he should protect. Thus says the Lord. So, Courtney, you can see that that is a really, really crucial distinction, because if someone doesn't have that theological understanding, there's a lot that can sneak in with Malachi chapter 2. So I just want people to know, God does not hate you. God does not see you as a failure. You are still a holy and dearly loved child of God. And God,
mm,
I do believe hates what divorce does to people, but God does not hate you.
Gosh, that is huge. Let's talk about money for a second. I know this is random, but my dream would be, and I know you've talked about this, but your dream would be to pay for every single person to get in therapy with a gym class in their local church. So talk to the woman who may be staying in a really destructive thing because there's just not finances to either get the divorce or go through the counseling. And we tell them about the podcast and things that they can do if they're in that situation.
Yeah. So we have a podcast that we do called Therapy and Theology, and it's free to anyone. We have amazing donors that have helped us underwrite the cost of therapy and theology, and it's accessible wherever you listen to podcasts. And actually, we have done a whole series on surviving an unwanted divorce. And there's several episodes that you can listen to, and you can listen to it on the go. You can listen to it wherever you're at. I do think my recommendation would be listen to the podcast, Surviving an Unwanted Divorce, Therapy and Theology, and also get this book. And I'm
Mm,
recommending it not just to people that are walking through a divorce, but also, like you said, Courtney, you have a friend, and you can say to your friend, like, I can pray for you, but maybe you don't have the depth of understanding of really what to say. And
mm,
sometimes if you're the friend helping, you can be afraid. Like, if this is such a massive life crisis, it can make you afraid to give any advice because you just don't know what will help, what will hurt.
yeah.
But maybe you don't even know, like, what is the theology, you know? And so I recommend you
Hmm.
reading the book alongside that friend. You guys read it together. And that's one of the best things you could do, or listen to the podcast together. And that's one of the best things you can do.
Can you tell us either another misconception or maybe another voice that you heard from the enemy, like you are a failure, God hates you, that God redirected you to truth during the midst of your own divorce?
Yeah. So I think one of the most important things that Joel walked me through is to remind myself that I am an image bearer of Christ. And because I'm an image bearer of Christ, that elevates me in importance, just like it does you, Courtney, that's our identity. So
Hmm.
sometimes people have taken the sacred institution of marriage, which is sacred, but they've elevated it over the value of the image bearer of Christ. In other words, some people have encouraged people that the most important thing to honor God is to save the marriage, even if it means to the destruction of the image bearer of God. And so I'm always very,
Mm,
very careful. Here's what I don't want someone to hear. I don't want you to hear that I'm minimizing marriage, that I'm minimizing the sacredness of marriage. I'm not. Look, if there was any way I could have saved my marriage, I would. And I did try. I tried for
mhm,
years and years and years. I forgave. I tried. I forgave again. I tried. I forgave again. We renewed our vows, and then everything fell apart again. And there were serious issues. And I sat across from a counselor that had walked me through a lot of this. And they just said, after I had had
mhm,
several life threatening medical crises because of it wasn't just the emotional stuff I was walking through, it was also the physical realities that were created because of the emotional distress. It really does affect the body. And I had almost died twice. And
yep, I
so I had a
remember.
counselor sit across from me, and the counselor said, Lysa, it is totally your choice. You can keep staying. But if you do, physically speaking, I don't think you'll be alive in a year. And
Mm,
so when you hear something like that, I had to make a very excruciating choice. Was I going to stay and try to save this marriage, which I had done for years and years and years? Or was I going to make a decision that my kids deserved one healthy parent and accept a very painful reality that I did not choose and that I did not want? It's very hard to walk toward a future you don't want. I always wanted my family to stay together. But in the
yeah,
end, I chose that my kids deserved one healthy parent, and I chose to live. And so
yeah,
that's what I want you to hear. A lot of women are in this kind of severe situation. They don't want this, but they have to make the choice to accept it because sometimes there's just no other path forward for someone to live, for someone to be a healthy parent, to continue to raise the kids. And I don't think that we should ever minimize when one partner starts to be destructive in the marriage, what it can do to the entire family.
yeah. Yeah. It's making me think back to, like, you're not exaggerating, like, you literally almost died a couple times, and I'm so glad you didn't as your friend. I'm so glad you're here, but, I do think and now that we have that book, The Body Keeps Score, and more people are talking about it, I think you really opened my eyes to the impact trauma and stress can have on your physical body. But I wanna go back for a second. I just had an episode in September with Vicky Courtney, and she wrote a book called Motherhood is Not Your Highest Calling. And we talked about the importance, same thing you're saying, of like when you have daughters, all of a sudden, you have to really be careful of your language to say, am I promising something or elevating something, like you said, that isn't God's design for our highest calling? And I even heard it as much as I loved every minute of the Charlie Kirk Memorial. I heard someone say that, I can't remember who it was, but they said the highest calling is being a spouse and having kids. And I was like, oh, it's semantics and it is important. But I think that reorders our brain in a way to like add to the failure message. And so remind us again, just one more time about our identity and how that shift in our mind is really, really important.
Yeah, I mean, the role of being a wife is an amazing role, and marriage is supposed to be a picture of Christ and his bride. Those are biblical truths, and they're amazing biblical truths. But your identity is not primarily that you are a wife. Your identity is that you are a child of God. You are an image bearer of Christ. And when two image bearers come together and they're both honoring the Lord in the biblical intentions for marriage, that is a beautiful, beautiful picture. That is something that should be prioritized. That is something that should be protected. But when you have an image bearer of Christ that is being faithful to God and an image bearer of
Hmm.
Christ that is not being faithful to God or to his wife, and that can be unfaithfulness can happen in more ways than just sexual infidelity. But when there's a destructive element happening inside the marriage, the sanctity of the life of the image bearer of Christ that is trying and honoring God, that life must be protected. That life must be protected. And there are so many women just like me who would give everything in the world to save their marriage. And boy, did I. I really did. But it
Mm.
should not be to the point where my life is destroyed or possibly even taken.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you talk to the woman that is in the early stages, the months? And so, one of the things you talk about in the book is just how to hold it all together. How do you hold together your life, your health, your family, your kids' health when it feels like you can't make it another 10 minutes?
Yeah. Well, acceptance is going to be a really important part of that process. I had a conversation several months ago with a woman who said, Lisa, what was the most important part of your healing journey? And at first, I fumbled with my answer a little bit, trying to figure out there were so many pieces and parts to my healing journey. How could I possibly name the most important one? But then it dawned on me the most important part of my healing journey was getting to the place where I could accept this is my reality
Mm,
now. I didn't want it, but it is my reality. So now what do I do with it? And part of that acceptance, Courtney, is to make sure that we don't go back and overly romanticize how good things were when
mm,
we were in the throes of like we were still together, but in the throes of all the destructive behavior. And
yeah.
so quickly, I'll just share this. A friend of mine who's in the middle of the divorce right now and having such a hard time accepting that this is now her future. She called me and she was hysterically crying and she said, Lisa, I opened up my bathroom cabinet and I'm down to the last two towels that my husband folded. That was one of his jobs in the
Mm,
house. He folded the towels a very specific, precise way. And when she opened up the cabinet and saw what's normally full of towels, and it was down to the very last two folded in that very distinctive way. It broke her heart all over again because it was yet another everyday moment of having to accept he'll never step into this house and fold towels again. And it wasn't about the towels, it's what the towels represented. And so I
yeah.
said, okay. I said to my friend, this is going to be hard, but because your husband was having an affair and he refused to stop having that affair, can we just interject some reality about the towel folding? It is very possible that while he was folding those towels, he could have been on the phone with his mistress. Now, that is, I do not
Mm.
mean that to be harsh, but it is so crucial we interject reality into that moment where we are overly romanticizing something that just absolutely needs to have all factors in. And she said, "You know what? You're absolutely right." And I said, "Or he could be over at his mistress's house folding her towels that way." And again, I don't say that to be harsh. But what's important is that you accept he's not going to be in your house folding towels. So now what do you need to do? Guess what? You get to decide how you want your towels folded. If you want to fold them in squares,
Mm.
if you want to fold them just like he did, if you want to roll them and tuck them in and have them be real precise, if you want to fold them in rectangles, if you want to fold them like they do on cruise ships in the shapes of little animals, or better yet, if you don't want to fold them at all, just stuff them in your cabinet and it is what it is. But it's time for you, instead of taking that moment as another thing that's been taken from you, see that as, okay, it's time to reclaim my life. And again, it's not about the towels, it's about what the towels represent. You now get to decide how you want your towels folded. Fold them or not, but you've got to keep moving forward because this is reality now.
Wow, so good. And I bet something tells me you could fold a towel in a little animal. Like, I feel like I know that about you.
No, Courtney, I would disappoint you with that. Look, I do like my towels folded, but not in the shape of animals.
Okay, let's talk about Chaz for a second because one of the things there's a lot of things you've said in your lifetime and your books and even in person that I've just tucked away, and I hope I get this right, but I remember looking at you and Chaz and thinking, like, y'all are so happy, you're so good, he's such a gift, which all those things are true. But you kind of paused me and said, well, he didn't make me happy. We were two whole people coming together, and that's a really beautiful thing. And so I think, would you just encourage the woman who feels so much responsibility to fix everything? And I think you would probably say, just fight for you and your journey to become whole and don't worry about the man coming. Don't worry about the other side through God and like counseling and all the work in your book.
So I do think it's important. If you've walked through a divorce, it is a major life altering trauma. And trauma is going to take time to heal. What you don't want to do, or what I knew I didn't want to do, I didn't want to jump into another relationship too quickly because I would, at that point, I was used to dysfunction. Dysfunction felt
Hmm.
normal to me. And in other words, my counselor said to me, Lysa, your picker is broken. We've got to do work so that you aren't. I know you have to be careful how you say that, but he was just explaining, Lisa, you've got to do some work so that you will be attracted to a healthy relationship, but you have not been in a healthy relationship. And so we've got some
Mm.
work to do. And I got to the place where at first I couldn't even fathom dating. That wasn't even a possibility. And several years went by. And then I got to the place where I was like, okay, I am lonely. But even in that loneliness, my counselor helped me see I needed to work on me until I no
Hmm.
longer felt like I needed another man to help me heal, but rather
Right.
I was well into my healing journey so I could be freed to want the right person. And that
Mm.
was really, really important. So give it some time. Please don't jump into another relationship too quickly. You know, the statistics on second marriages are scary, and that's not to say
Mm.
that there aren't thriving, healthy second marriages out there. I pray that I'm in one now. I feel like I am. But I think a big part of that was I took time. And I took time not only for myself and not only for my own healing, but I also took time because my kids needed some space, some healing. Things needed to settle down in our world. And my priority at that point needed to be to take really good care of them and make
Mhm.
sure that they were at a place where they could even accept the potential for a different person being my spouse.
Yeah. So good. Well, surviving an unwanted divorce, and here's the subtitle. Is that the right word for it? I should know. I've written a book. A biblical practical guide to letting go while holding yourself together came out this week. And so I know you think very deeply about the books that you write and you think very deeply about the reader. And so just encourage her, whoever's going to pick this up, what do you hope and pray that she experiences on the other side of it?
I want you to know that your life is not over. And just because your life
Mm.
is different, different doesn't mean bad. Different just means different. And will there
Mm.
be certain things that linger for a long time? Little triggers, little hurts, little things that pop into your mind, or looking back at pictures of the way things used to be, of course, you're very human. I'm very human. Of course, those things hurt. But just because you've been hurt doesn't mean you have to live hurt. Just
Mm.
because you've been angry doesn't mean you have to live angry. Just because you've been broken doesn't mean you have to live broken. The very best thing to do from this point is go on and live a really terrific life. Your pain is not pointless. There are so many other people who are in the trenches right now who your voice could be the very one to help them survive this.
Oh,
So that's my prayer. Don't give up.
yeah.
Don't give in. Go on and live a really terrific life because it is possible.
So good. Hey, I love you. I'm proud of you. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Courtney. Love you too, friend. Bye bye.
Bye.
Christian parenting.